The Miami heat of August 1989 was a living thing, a humid blanket that clung to your skin, making every breath feel heavy, even in the artificial chill of an air-conditioned patrol car. Officer David Miller, badge number 427, knew its suffocating embrace intimately, a constant companion on his shifts. For 5 years he'd navigated these sun-baked streets, from the buzzing neon glow of South Beach's Art Deco district, where late-night revelers spilled onto Ocean Drive, to the vibrant, chaotic pulse of Little Havana, where the scent of strong Cuban coffee and hand-rolled cigars perpetually hung in the air. He was 34, a dedicated cop, a man who believed in the thin blue line not as a rigid barrier, but as a crucial lifeline for a city constantly teetering on the edge of its own beautiful, dangerous contradictions. Miami was a city of extremes, glittering wealth and grinding poverty, breathtaking beauty and stark violence, all simmering under the relentless Florida sun. His mornings usually began before dawn in his modest Coral Gables home, a quiet oasis where the air still hung thick with the scent of jasmine and the faint, comforting hum of distant traffic. Sarah, his wife, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering support, would already be up, a silent, comforting presence in their kitchen, her movements efficient and graceful. She'd pour him a steaming cup of cafecito, strong and sweet enough to kickstart his day, its aroma mingling with the faint smell of her lilac perfume. Their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, a bright, curious child with her mother's wide, expressive eyes, would often tumble out of bed, eyes still heavy with sleep, her small body radiating warmth as she demanded a good morning hug from her papa before he slipped into his crisp, dark blue uniform. These were the moments David cherished, the precious anchors in a job that constantly threatened to pull him into its turbulent, often brutal currents. They were his reason, his sanctuary. Today, August 23rd, felt different. A restless, almost electric energy had been simmering beneath the surface of the city, a low thrum that David could feel deep in his bones, a premonition he couldn't quite articulate. The usual radio chatter seemed sharper, more urgent, the calls for service more frequent, more desperate, reflecting the city's underlying tension. He was on patrol in the fringes of Wynwood, an area then still largely industrial, a sprawling patchwork of aging warehouses, gritty auto shops, and overgrown lots, a far cry from the artistic hub it would one day become. Here, far from the tourist-laden beaches, the oppressive heat felt even heavier, trapping the stale, metallic smell of exhaust fumes, stale beer, and the faint, sweet decay of tropical vegetation. For weeks, David had been working a series of increasingly brazen burglaries targeting small, independent businesses in this very district. What had started as petty theft, stolen cash registers, electronics, had quickly escalated with reports of intimidation, even a minor assault on a shop owner who had tried to intervene. It wasn't high-profile work, not like the elaborate drug kingpins or brutal gang wars that often dominated the local news, but David had a tenacious gut feeling it was connected to something larger, something uglier, a more organized criminal enterprise operating in the shadows. He'd been discreetly cultivating an informant, a small-time mechanic named Marco Delgado, who worked out of a dusty, perpetually oil-stained garage on NW 25th Street. Marco was unreliable, jumpy, always looking over his shoulder, but he had ears in the right places, a network of street-level contacts. Yesterday, Marco had left a cryptic, panicked message on David's answering machine, a bulky, analog device with a tape recorder. The recorded voice had been barely a whisper, filled with a palpable terror. "Officer Miller, it's getting hot, much hotter than you know. They're talking about a shipment, something big moving through the docks, linked to the Wynwood robberies. You need to be careful, I can't talk anymore, not on the phone. Meet me tomorrow, same place just after sunset. Don't tell anyone, Miller, no one." The crackle of static had followed, then the abrupt, jarring click of the dial tone. David hadn't liked it one bit. Don't tell anyone went against every ingrained protocol, every rule of officer safety. But Marco's fear had been raw, genuine, and David knew that fear could be a powerful, if dangerous, motivator. He debated calling Detective Ricardo Ramirez, his unofficial mentor on the force, a grizzled veteran whose face bore the marks of countless solved and unsolved cases. But Ramirez was off-duty, visiting extended family in Homestead, a good hour's drive south. David decided to play it close just for this one meeting. He'd check it out, get the information, then bring it all to Ramirez first thing in the morning. A small, independent win, he thought, a chance to prove he could handle this complex, shadowy side of police work. He kept the thoughts, the gnawing anxiety, to himself that morning. Sarah, ever perceptive, had noticed his distant gaze, the slight furrow in his brow over breakfast. "Everything okay, hun?" she'd asked, her hand resting gently on his arm, her eyes searching his. David had forced a smile, a little too tight, a little too quick. "Just a long shift ahead, Sar. You know how it is. More paperwork than patrol, probably." He'd kissed Lily's forehead, feeling the soft weight of her hair against his lips, the scent of her innocent slumber still clinging to her. "Be a good girl for mommy, all right, sweet pea." He'd murmured, a moment of pure parental tenderness amidst the gathering storm. Now, as the afternoon wore on, the relentless Miami sun dipping towards the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges, purples, and deep mauves, David felt a growing, icy unease. He'd finished his last scheduled patrol, meticulously filed his reports at the station, and driven his unit, a solid, slightly worn 1987 Ford LTD Crown Victoria, to a quiet side street just a few blocks from Marco's garage. He parked discreetly around the corner, out of sight from the main thoroughfare. The air conditioning in the old patrol car struggled valiantly against the encroaching humidity, emitting a low, rattling groan. He checked his watch, a standard-issue Timex, 7:15 p.m. Marco had said just after sunset, which was around 7:30. He pulled out his radio, a Motorola, debating making a quick check-in, a silent breadcrumb. His finger hovered over the transmit button, then pulled back, a fleeting moment of self-reliance, of wanting to handle it. Just a quick meet, no big deal, nothing to worry about. He stepped out of the car, the stifling air immediately enveloping him, heavy and still. He straightened his uniform, adjusted his duty belt, the familiar weight of his sidearm a small comfort. The street was quiet, eerily so. Abandoned warehouses cast long, monolithic shadows that stretched across the cracked asphalt. The only sounds were the distant, muted hum of traffic from the Palmetto Expressway and the incessant chirping of crickets, a symphony of the encroaching night. He walked briskly towards Marco's garage, his senses heightened, his hand instinctively resting on the grip of his service weapon, a standard Smith & Wesson Model 5969. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. He found Marco's garage door slightly ajar, a sliver of weak, yellowish light spilling from within, fighting against the deepening twilight. "Marco." "You in here?" David called out, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained, echoing eerily in the stillness. No answer, just the oppressive silence. He pushed the door open further, stepping cautiously into the dim, oil-scented interior. The garage was empty, tools scattered haphazardly on workbenches, a partially dismantled car on a hydraulic hoist casting a grotesque silhouette. A faint, metallic smell, something more acrid than just oil, hung heavily in the air, catching in the back of his throat. David's heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This wasn't right, this was not what he expected. He pulled out his heavy-duty police flashlight, sweeping the powerful beam across the cluttered space, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Then he saw it, a dark, sticky stain on the concrete floor, almost black in the poor light, half hidden beneath a greasy workbench. And beside it, partially obscured by a discarded rag, a single tarnished silver locket. It was Lily's. The one he'd given Sarah for their anniversary, with a tiny, precious photo of Lily tucked inside. Sarah always wore it, a comforting, familiar weight around her neck. David had seen her with it that very morning, glinting against her skin as she poured his coffee. A chilling, gut-wrenching dread seized him, colder than any air conditioning, more suffocating than any humidity. This wasn't a warning, this wasn't a message for Marco, this was a message, cruel and personal, specifically for him. The air seemed to grow colder, despite the heat pressing down on him. David felt a sudden, blinding blow to the back of his head, a sickening thud that reverberated through his skull. The world spun violently, colors exploding behind his eyes, then dissolved into a black, suffocating void. The scent of oil and fear was the last thing he knew. The next morning, the Miami-Dade Police Department launched a full-scale search for Officer David Miller. His patrol car was found precisely where he'd left it, untouched, unlocked, a silent testament to his abrupt departure. His service weapon, however, was missing. Inside Marco's garage, the scene was meticulously clean, save for a faint, lingering scent of bleach, like a clumsy attempt to erase a terrible truth. The silver locket was gone, and Marco was nowhere to be found, his tiny, run-down apartment on Cal Acho emptied of all his meager belongings. It was as if both men had vanished into the humid Miami night, leaving only questions in their wake. Detective Ricardo Ramirez, a man whose face carried the topography of 2 decades on the force, the lines around his eyes deepened by countless grim discoveries, was pulled onto the case immediately. He'd known David Miller for years, respected his unwavering dedication, his almost naive belief in the simple power of justice. Now, a cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach, a familiar sensation when a case felt profoundly wrong. Officers don't just disappear, not without a trace, not without leaving some kind of breadcrumb, some final struggle. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity, fueled by a collective sense of urgency and dread within the department. Uniformed officers fanned out across Wynwood and the surrounding areas, knocking on doors, questioning reluctant residents, sifting through dumpsters in search of any discarded clue. Helicopters crisscrossed the hazy Miami sky, their rotors chopping at the thick, humid air, their searchlights probing the urban landscape. Dive teams searched canals, the murky, alligator-infested waters of the Everglades, and the sprawling, dark depths of Biscayne Bay. Every police officer in the department felt the personal sting of the disappearance. One of their own, a brother in blue, was gone, swallowed by the city he served. Sarah Miller's world crumbled, not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing slide into despair. The initial calls from the department were polite, apologetic, filled with empty promises. Then they grew more frequent, more invasive, each question a fresh stab. She remembered David's distant gaze that morning, his forced smile, the way he'd clutched Lily so tightly. The locket, why had he left his car, his weapon, without backup? The questions gnawed at her, twisting her gut, denying her sleep. She clung to Lily, her daughter's innocence a fragile, precious shield against the encroaching despair. Lily, too young to fully grasp the profound absence, would simply ask, "Where's Papa?" Sarah would offer vague reassurances, her voice cracking, her heart breaking a little more each time, unable to explain a mystery she herself could not comprehend. Ramirez pursued every lead, no matter how tenuous, driven by a deep sense of responsibility, an annoying suspicion that David had walked into something far bigger than he could handle alone. He revisited the small businesses David had been investigating, interviewed Marco's estranged family and associates, digging through the city's underbelly for whispers. The drug ring David had been tracking, known locally as Lowe's Phantasmas, the Ghosts, was a small, loosely organized group involved in street-level cocaine distribution, petty larceny, and opportunistic burglaries. They were known to be violent, quick to intimidation, but usually avoided direct, lethal confrontation with law enforcement. Ramirez couldn't believe they would be so bold, so reckless, as to abduct and potentially murder a police officer. It was a line rarely crossed, even by the most hardened criminals, for fear of the overwhelming retribution that would inevitably follow. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, the leads dried up one by one. Marco Delgado was never found, his apartment cleared out, his ghost swallowed by the city. No one from Lowe's Phantasmas was cooperative enough to offer any real information, their silence a wall of fear and distrust. Tips from the public, initially fueled by local news reports and the department's reward offer, came flooding in. Sightings in Little Havana, a man resembling David seen near the airport, another near the lonely, sprawling expanses of the Everglades. Each one was a false hope, a dead end, meticulously investigated and then discarded. The local media, initially ravenous for every new detail, slowly lost interest, moving on to the next sensational story, leaving David Miller's disappearance to fade into the background noise of Miami's crime blotter. The police department, despite its continued official efforts, was left with a gaping, painful hole. Some whispered about desertion, about David having gotten involved in something illicit himself and fleeing the city. Ramirez vehemently shut down such talk, his voice stern, his gaze challenging. He knew David, he knew his character, his unwavering moral compass. But without a body, without a confession, without any concrete evidence to the contrary, the whispers persisted like a venomous infection, slowly eroding the department's faith in its own. Sarah faced an unbearable duality. Her husband was gone, but without a death certificate, she was trapped in a legal and emotional purgatory. The small police pension was delayed, complicated by the lack of definitive proof. She took on extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, picking up every available hour, her exhaustion a constant companion, a heavy cloak she wore. Lily started kindergarten, drawing pictures of a smiling man in a police uniform, her memories of David fading into soft, indistinct shapes like old photographs bleached by the sun. Sarah kept his uniform pressed, his badge polished, a shrine in their closet, a testament to a man who simply ceased to be. The investigation became a cold case, a thick, heavy binder of reports tucked away in a dusty filing cabinet in the MDPD's basement archives. Ramirez, now older, his hair streaked with more gray, his shoulders heavier with the weight of unsolved cases, would pull it out sometimes, late at night, poring over the faded notes, looking for something, anything he might have missed, a tiny detail that could unlock the mystery. He couldn't shake the feeling of failure, the weight of a vanished colleague, a family left in agonizing limbo. David Miller had been a good cop. He deserved more than a silent disappearance, a footnote in the city's grim history. Years passed. The calendar pages turned relentlessly. 1990, 1995, 2000. Miami continued to grow, to reinvent itself, its skyline punctuated by new high-rises, its streets humming with different rhythms. Wynwood slowly began its transformation, the first stirrings of an artistic renaissance. Sarah, now 38, lived a life of quiet resilience, raising Lily, now 15, a bright, thoughtful teenager who carried her father's loss with a quiet strength, shaped by an absence she never truly knew. The case of Officer David Miller was a ghost story whispered in the hallways of the MDPD, a cautionary tale about the perils of the job, a wound that never quite healed. Then came the new millennium, ushering in changes that even Miami couldn't escape. The year was 2001. A sweltering autumn was giving way to a more temperate early winter, a welcome respite from the relentless humidity. An old, dilapidated industrial complex in Hialeah, on the fringes of the Palmetto Expressway, was slated for demolition. The property had been an eyesore for decades, a warren of abandoned warehouses, disused machinery, and overgrown vegetation, a forgotten relic of an earlier industrial boom. A new developer had acquired the land, planning a modern retail park, another testament to Miami's ceaseless evolution. On a crisp December morning, the air still cool and fresh from a passing cold front, a bulldozer operator, clearing a particularly overgrown section near the perimeter fence, hit something solid and unyielding. The machine shuddered, then stalled, its engine sputtering. Cursing under his breath in Spanish, the operator, a burly man named Jorge, climbed down, expecting to find old concrete foundations or buried pipes. Instead, partially exposed from the red clay soil beneath a thick tangle of weeds, was a human femur, bleached white and brittle with age. Panic set in quickly, a primal, chilling fear. The site was immediately cordoned off, the construction crew sent home. Forensic teams from the Miami-Dade Police Department arrived, including Captain Ramirez, now head of the cold case unit, his face etched with a familiar, grim determination. He hadn't been on the scene for a new discovery like this in years, but a familiar dread settled over him, cold and heavy. The bone was clearly old, deeply discolored, suggesting it had been buried for a very long time. As the forensic anthropologists carefully, painstakingly excavated the site, sifting through layers of compacted industrial debris and soil, more remains began to emerge. A partial skeleton, buried shallowly, almost haphazardly. The position suggested a hasty, disrespectful burial. Among the bones, intertwined with remnants of deteriorated dark blue cloth, they found fragments of cracked leather, corroded metal, and a single, unmistakable silver object. A tarnished police badge, number 427, belonging to Officer David Miller. The discovery sent a shockwave through the MDPD, echoing through its corridors and across the city. 12 years of unanswered questions, of whispered doubts, of a family's silent suffering, suddenly found a grim, undeniable answer. The remains were carefully exhumed, transported to the medical examiner's office with a solemn, almost reverent procession. Dental records confirmed it within hours, the last remaining sliver of hope for his family extinguished. It was David. Captain Ramirez stood in the sterile, fluorescent-lit morgue, staring at the shattered fragments of a life, a career cut tragically short. The uniform was barely recognizable, just scraps of dark fabric clinging to bones, but the badge, his badge, was intact, a beacon in the darkness. He felt a wave of profound sorrow, mixed with a bitter, hollow relief. David hadn't deserted, he hadn't gone rogue, he had been murdered. The news reached Sarah Miller via a grim-faced police chaplain and Captain Ramirez himself, delivering the devastating truth in the familiar living room where David once played with Lily. Lily, now 16, a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, sat beside her mother, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and dawning comprehension. Sarah listened numb as Ramirez explained the details, the finding in Hialeah, the irrefutable confirmation. Her husband was home. After 12 agonizing years, he was finally home. But the relief was fleeting, overshadowed by the fresh, raw grief of a loss re-experienced, a wound torn open anew. The subsequent investigation, led by Ramirez's cold case unit, reignited with a furious intensity, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. The discovery of the body, even after so long, provided tangible evidence, a concrete starting point. Forensic techniques had advanced significantly since 1989. While DNA extraction from the degraded remains was challenging, they were able to find microscopic traces of industrial solvents and unique soil compounds on the skeletal remains, matching them to the Hialeah site, linking the crime to a specific place. Crucially, a new lead emerged from the old case files, a single, overlooked detail from Marco Delgado's initial interrogation logs, a brief mention of a particular warehouse used by Lowe's Phantasmas for temporary storage. The warehouse was right next to the demolition site where David's body was found. Ramirez dug deeper into Lowe's Phantasmas, tracing their evolution and disintegration. The original members had largely dispersed over the years, some dead, some in prison for unrelated crimes, some simply vanished into the sprawling anonymity of the city. But one name kept resurfacing, a persistent ghost from the past. Miguel El Lobo Chavez. He was a mid-level enforcer for the drug ring in 1989, known for his cold brutality and meticulous nature. He was serving time in a state penitentiary for a murder committed in 1995, a completely separate incident, a life sentence already secured. Ramirez went to see Chavez, traveling to the grim, remote prison facility. The man was older now, gaunt, his once fierce eyes holding a lifetime of regrets and violence, his bravado worn thin by years behind bars. He had nothing left to lose. Ramirez laid out the facts, the discovery of Miller's body, the overwhelming evidence now connecting Chavez's old crew to the site. He mentioned the locket, the one David had given Sarah, a detail that resonated even in that hardened heart. Chavez's hardened facade finally cracked, a fissure in the wall he had built around his soul. He confessed, not out of remorse perhaps, but out of a desperate, weary need to clear his conscience, or perhaps to gain some minuscule leverage for his own sentence. He admitted that David Miller had indeed stumbled too close to their operation, an operation far more extensive and violent than David had initially understood. Marco the informant had been working both sides, feeding David information while also alerting Lowe's Phantasmas when the heat was on. The night of David's disappearance, Marco had lured him to the garage, where Chavez and two others, El Diablo Morales and Hector Ruiz, were waiting in the shadows. David had been ambushed. They hadn't intended to kill him, Chavez claimed, just to rough him up, scare him off, make an example. But David had fought back fiercely, bravely, even after being struck from behind, his police training kicking in. In the chaos, in the fear of being exposed and facing the full might of the police department, one of Chavez's accomplices, the hot-headed young El Diablo Morales, had panicked. He'd grabbed David's own service weapon, the very Smith & Wesson David had touched for comfort just moments before, and shot him. Once, in the chest, they had wrapped his body in a tarp, transported it under the cover of night to the abandoned industrial site in Hialeah, a remote location they often used for disposing of evidence or unwanted goods, knowing it would remain undisturbed for years. They buried him shallowly, hastily, tossing his weapon into the canal nearby, a canal that had been searched multiple times in 1989. But by then, the strong currents had likely carried it away or buried it deeper in the muck. Marco, fearing for his life after betraying both sides, had been given a sum of cash and told to disappear, which he had, never to be heard from again. The locket had been a cruel taunt, left deliberately to sow confusion and fear, to mislead investigators into thinking David had been investigating a domestic issue. The confession brought a chilling clarity to the case and a bitter form of closure. El Diablo Morales, the actual shooter, had died in a gang shootout in Little Havana in 1993, never facing justice for David's murder. The third accomplice, Hector Ruiz, had fled to Mexico years ago and was now believed to be living under an assumed identity, beyond the reach of Miami law enforcement. While full justice wouldn't be served, Chavez's testimony allowed for a formal closure, confirming the grim truth. David Miller was laid to rest with full police honors, 12 years late. The funeral was a somber, deeply emotional event, attended by hundreds of officers, both active and retired, a silent testament to the enduring bonds of brotherhood and sacrifice. Sarah, her face etched with a quiet, dignified grief, held Lily's hand, her anchor. Lily, now a young woman, looked out at the sea of blue uniforms, her father's memory finally solidified not as a fleeting, half-remembered image, but as a hero who had made the ultimate sacrifice in the line of duty. The case, while formally closed, left lingering shadows, the pain of what-ifs, of lost years, of a life brutally cut short. Sarah never remarried, dedicating herself to Lily and keeping David's memory alive, a beacon of strength and love. Lily, inspired by her father's dedication and the tireless work of Captain Ramirez, went on to study criminal justice, hoping to one day work in cold cases, to bring answers and a measure of peace to other families still searching, still yearning for truth in the darkness. The Miami sun still blazed, its golden light washing over the city, and the city's pulse still throbbed with its unique blend of vibrancy and danger. But for the Miller family, and for the Miami-Dade Police Department, the memory of Officer David Miller served as a powerful, enduring reminder. A reminder of the silent battles fought on the streets, the human cost of dedication, and the relentless pursuit of truth, even when it takes a devastatingly long time to uncover. The humid air of Miami had kept its secrets for 12 long years, cloaked in dust and urban decay, but eventually the earth gave them up, allowing a fallen officer to finally find his peace and his family, a fragile, hard-won closure.